Well, Pat, it was one of the most stunning political upsets in American history. And ever since November 2016, people have been asking, how did Donald Trump pull it off? The big question now is, can he do it again in 2020? David Brody has more.
As it became clear that Trump had won an overwhelming majority of the evangelical and Catholic vote in 2016, the question became, why did they vote for him? That's because prevailing wisdom had been that Trump's divorces, affairs, and scandals would sink his chances of winning over socially conservative Christians. One strategist who was not at all surprised by Trump's victory is Ralph Reed, founder and chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. Reed says he knows why American Christians took a chance on Donald Trump in 2016 and why they continue to support him today.
Well, Ralph Reed is the founder of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. He's author of a book called For God and Country. Ralph, tell the folks at Reagan, this is one magnificent cover. I don't know who did the cover of your book, but it's beautiful. Congratulations.
Thank you, Pat. Great to be with you.
Hey, listen, what did you find out when you were writing this book? I was so interested to read about, of course, we know the evangelicals have gone 83% or so for Trump.
Right.
Why do they do it?
I argue in the book, Pat, that, and I wrote the book not so much as a defense of Donald Trump, although I do plenty of that, and happily so. I did it primarily as a defense of Christians who've been called every name in the book. They've been accused of being hypocrites and spiritual frauds. They've been accused of selling out the gospel to get access to power and get a few items on their policy agenda. And in writing the book, what I lay out is, in fact, what happened, Pat, is in the primaries, 2/3 of self-identified evangelical Christians supported someone other than Trump, usually a Ted Cruz, Huckabee, Marco Rubio, someone like that. But once they faced a binary choice between Donald Trump, who pledged to be pro-life, pro-religious freedom, appoint originalists and conservatives to the courts, and was pro-Israel, and pledged to either renegotiate or withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal, which he called one of the worst diplomatic debacles in U.S. history. And Hillary Clinton was on the other side of all those issues. And I point out, Pat, and you know this very well, that on top of all that, there was a vacancy on the Supreme Court on Election Day that either Trump was going to fill or Hillary was going to fill. And in For God and Country, I point out, and I didn't know this, by the way, I have a doctorate in history, but I didn't study this. The last time the American people went to the polls and voted for a president, and on that day there was a vacancy on the court that would decide the ideological balance of the court, was 1860 on the threshold of the Civil War. So in a sense, facing that choice, believing in the sanctity of life with the Supreme Court determining that issue, they did the right thing, not just politically, but morally, to advance these moral goods and to make sure the court moved in a pro-life direction.
It looks like a lot of these guys run for office, and then having gotten in, they just forget about their promises. Trump has delivered, hasn't he?
You know, Pat, I have a 30-page appendix in the book that details all the accomplishments and achievements of President Trump in just the first 3 years of his administration. And the best way to sum it up is promises made, promises kept. You know, presidents for 25 years promised they would move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That is not only a promise that was made, it's federal law. It's a law passed by Congress in 1995. Every other president waived it. Trump kept that promise, recognized Israel as the eternal capital, Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel, recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, as I said, imposed tough sanctions on Iran, and most importantly for these voters, he not only kept his promise on that Scalia vacancy by appointing Neil Gorsuch, he kept it again in 2018 when you had the Anthony Kennedy vacancy and he appointed Brett Kavanaugh, and he's kept it 200 other times with other originalist, pro-life, and conservative judges. So yes, he kept his word.
He is a guy who has been pretty gross in his treatment of women, and yet at the same time, the evangelicals just love him. Is it because of his character? Is it because of keeping his promises? What do you find?
Well, I argue in For God and Country that there were three inflection points in the 2016 campaign. The first was when he released a list of initially 12 and ultimately 21 jurists and said, if you elect me president, I'm going to pick my Supreme Court justices from this list. Pat, it's easy to forget that's the first time in American history that's ever happened. That's the most transparent promise ever. Not I'm going to pick somebody like Alito or like Clarence Thomas. I'm going to pick one of these people. Second was when he selected Mike Pence, which was a window into his ambitious and audacious conservative governing aspirations. And then the third came in the third and final debate when Chris Wallace famously asked the question about late-term abortion. Hillary gave the usual Planned Parenthood talking points. And Donald Trump said in words that I believe won him the election. She just said she's in favor of ripping the baby from its mother's womb moments before it's born. Maybe she's okay with that. I am not okay with that. And those stands on those moral issues with moral clarity and courage trumped, if I can use that term, whatever reservations people of faith had about his checkered past and sort of tabloid coverage in previous years.
You know, Ralph, I was watching that debate, as I'm sure you were. I couldn't believe that Hillary would toe the party line on abortion. We're talking about a baby being partially born, partially leaving the birth canal and having his brains sucked out. And she said, I'm going to defend a woman's right to do that. I mean, it was so horrible. I mean, the choice was so stark between the two of them.
It was indeed. And, you know, if she had, Pat, if she had even expressed a measure of empathy or understanding for the reservations, the deep and abiding moral reservations of tens of millions of Americans about partial birth and late-term and pain-capable abortion. These are children who routinely survive outside the womb, in many cases right before they're born or as they're being born. And she was just dismissive, and it was of a piece with her comment earlier in the campaign where she denounced all Trump supporters as deplorables and irredeemable, condemning them as racists and bigots. And the truth is, Pat, that, and I argue this extensively in the book, evangelical Christians have always been willing to extend mercy and grace to those who've made mistakes in the past. Trump was not the first candidate that they did that with. And I think not only did it not compromise or surrender their faith in Jesus Christ and the gospel, I think it was an expression of the gospel. Jesus didn't condemn sinners. He extended mercy to them. He condemned the religious and the self-righteous. So contrary to what the critics of people of faith say, their willingness to accept Trump for who he was and where he was and love on him and help move him in the right direction was an eloquent and tangible expression of their faith.
Last question, the Faith and Freedom Coalition you've got going, what are you doing in this current election? It's rather extensive from what I gather.
It's not only extensive, it's unprecedented in modern American political history. We at Faith and Freedom have built a pre-qualified voter file based on the most advanced data analytics available in the world today of 41.6 million Bible-believing evangelical and faithful Roman Catholic voters. About 28 million of them will be in the states that will decide the election. We're going to knock on the doors of somewhere between 3 and 4 million homes. We'll make about 10 million phone calls. We'll send out about 20 to 30 million text messages as people are voting, giving them a nonpartisan voter guide, and literally a link to an app that will take them directly to their voting location that works like a Starbucks app. And we'll track as they vote in the states. So I think combined with Trump's record of accomplishment and what we do with our ground game, Pat, we're going to see the biggest turnout of evangelicals and other conservative Christians in American history on November 3rd.
Right. You're doing that under the radar. That's the thing of it. The so-called mainstream media won't pick up on that. But you're mobilizing an army that it's never in history anything of this magnitude. Is that right?
It is right, and it's metal on the target. You know, we don't really waste a lot of our money on 30-second television ads or even radio ads. I question, Pat, whether or not, you know, in a state like Florida, between the two campaigns, they're going to spend $100 million on television. At a certain point, voters tune it out. But if somebody shows up at your door and hands you a piece of literature and urges you to vote, if somebody is in your Sunday school passing out our literature and they're a friend or a family member, somebody that you have a connection with, that person-to-person human connection, for all our advances in technology and the rise of the internet, elections are still won and lost face-to-face, person-to-person, door-to-door.
Does Trump know you're doing this?
I think he's aware of it because of published accounts, and certainly he's a friend of mine, as I know he is yours. But I generally don't share with him or the campaign all the details of what we're doing because we're an independent organization. We're doing it, just to be clear, not just to benefit some specific candidate. That's not really our objective. Mm-hmm. Our objective is to do something that I think is more important biblically and historically. I believe God calls his people to be effective and muscular citizens, because if they do so, they will carry the gospel to the very courts of Caesar in biblical times and all the way to the White House in our times.
Pretty eloquent, brother. Hey, this is a terrific book, For God and Country. Now, where can you get the book?
The book is everywhere where books are sold. They can go to Amazon, they can go to any bookstore, or they can go to Faith and Freedom Coalition's website, ffcoalition.com, and they can get a copy there. And we're praying and believing God that it will equip believers as we head into this election season.
Ralph, congratulations, my friend. You're doing a marvelous job, and the nation owes you a debt of gratitude. Thank you.
Pat, thank you very much, and right back at you, and even more so for all you've done for our country and for the kingdom of God.
Thank you, my brother. God bless you. Amazing mobilization. You didn't hear it anyplace except here.
Wonderful, wonderful to know all of that's happening.
Oh, it's amazing. Under the radar. It's extraordinary. This book, For God and Country, as I say, is one of the prettiest. It's Regnery publishes this. It's a gorgeous cover, and you can get it wherever. A lot of the bookstores have been closed, but they'll be opening up very shortly. And so this book's available. Ralph Reed, For God and Country, Faith and Freedom Coalition.